Hey everybody, this is Robbie with Robbie's Reptiles. Today we're going to be going over the soft scale gene. What is it? How does it work? Is it worth investing in? So this here is an example of a bog standard normal, not soft scale Crested Gecko. Granted, this is an amazing looking Crested Gecko. This is just a normal scale. So if we get really close, just so you guys can kind of see the definition in the scales, not a soft scale, I must say again. But this is an incredible looking XXX dashed pinstripe Harlequin, black base, Halloween, a really nice female. So now let's take a look at our first just soft scale. I recently had been looking at her and I saw that she had, a certain look to her. Her scales were really fascinating and much more detailed. And then I ended up tracking down where the person I bought it from had got it from, which was from Flawless Crested Geckos. And what do you know? The lineage turned out that the mother was a empty back soft scale. So after finding out the lineage for this girl, I'm very confident in saying that this is a soft scale. Now, how do I know? It is something that might be hard to come across on camera, but the scales on her are much smaller and they're much more uniform than a standard Crested Gecko. This one's normal, this one is the soft scale. And you can see that this one just looks kind of more creamy. It looks softened almost, not physically, but visually, like someone diffused her scales. It's a lot more appealing and it's a very subtle change right now. That seems like a pointless gene. Why would anyone want to invest in it when all it's doing is changing their scales? So what? What ends up happening is not only are you changing the structure of the scales, but you're actually changing the way the light is reflecting and refracting through and off of those scales. By making them smaller and by making more of them, you're allowing the actual skin color to show through a lot more actually. And the way that the light reflects off of it ends up with a little bit more contrast, a velvety appearance, and a little bit more saturation. And while it isn't an actual result of the genetic mutation, there seems to be a strong correlation to great head structure whenever it comes to the soft scale gene or super soft. So here's an example of a soft scale lily white. As you can see, like I was talking about, there's a strong correlation between good head structure and the soft scale gene. Whether that has anything to do with the actual gene or if it's just strong genetics in the lines from AC Reptiles, which is probably that, there seems to be strong correlation between it. And this just happens to be a fantastic example of, even if this was just a plain old lily white, there'd be a slight difference. This is just really good genetics. She's originally from Port Geckos in Canada, and she is one of my favorite Crested Geckos. She has this different look to her compared to a normal lily white. She has a much more velvety appearance, and her scales are just different shapes, right? And you can see it predominantly on her head scales, as well as her pinstriping is just different shapes, and her color is just, it's more velvety. And now for the meat and potatoes of why you guys are here. This is a super soft scale Halloween or tangerine. I'm not 100% sure what I would classify her as, but this is a super soft scale Crested Gecko. And apparently there are some visual markers for a super soft. It might even be for soft. Silver eyes, I've heard, is a visual marker for super soft Crested Geckos. If you guys look at her, you can very much see her scales are completely different than your average Crested Gecko. And you can really see her silver eyes there. That's awesome. Her scales are super far apart and much smaller, and there's much more of them. And she has probably the best phenotypic expression of the soft scale gene. So being super soft, that means that she has 2 copies of the soft scale gene, meaning that if you pair her to a normal, you will get nothing but soft scale Crested Geckos. And when she's fired up, she's got amazing contrast. Sadly, she doesn't have a black base color. It's much more of a brown, but you can still see how it really it makes this velvety look. It's hard to put it into words, and it is more subtle. I will give you guys that. But I think that this is going to be the future of Crested Geckos. We're going to get to the point where people have got, 5 visual genes in a Crested Gecko at a time. Then, if someone's able to add 2 copies of the soft scale, even if that's only making a 5% improvement, eventually that 5% improvement is going to be the difference between, a $500 gecko and a $5,000 gecko. So the genetics behind the soft scale gene, soft scale is incomplete dominant, which means that the gene can represent visually with only 1 copy in the Crested Gecko's genetics. This is great for reproducing. You compare this to anything and half the offspring should have it. The downside to that being how subtle this gene can be at times, it might be difficult to identify a soft scale. And oftentimes there is a little bit more nuance when it comes to the production of these, which I think also just adds longevity to the gene. Something like this, Nikki, which is a beautiful Halloween XXX, she's great and she's already really contrasty. But if I added soft scale and then down the road added another so that we could possibly make her but super soft, the results would be jaw dropping. You would have something with the most vibrant oranges, the deepest blacks, and you would improve her pretty lackluster head structure. So that pretty much does it with the soft scale and super soft gene. I would really recommend you guys read up on it. I will have links to articles about it in the description below and to some of AC Reptiles listings so that you guys can see some of his direct stock that he's created of supers and soft scales. I think that it is grossly underrepresented in the Crested Gecko hobby and it deserves a moment in the spotlight.